I'm going to let you into a little secret. I shouldn't be standing about here. I should probably be standing kind of round about here, and there should be somebody else standing here, which would be my co-speaker Ella, who unfortunately hasn't been able to make it. So you've only got me. So this is kind of what I learned from rescuing a mammoth technology integration at Bloom & Wild. So just to start off with, we live in some pretty uncertain times at the moment, right? It could be argued, in most cases, it's a bit of a kind of shit time to be a human at the moment. We've had the pandemic, which is obviously a terrible thing, widespread disruption, uncertainty. We've got geopolitical instability, Ukraine, Gaza, Iran, lots of places that we don't hear about in the news every day as well. We've had economic uncertainty. So particularly if you're one of the people over the last few years that's been unfortunately affected by layoffs in different companies. And we've also got this rapid technology change. So we've heard earlier today, for example, around the rapid pace of change driven by AI and the uncertainty and the kind of maybe sometimes quite overwhelming impact that has. So it's a bit of a hard time. And when it's hard like this, we often, we go back to what we know and what we understand, and we get these feelings of nostalgia more so. And all of this nostalgia and these nostalgic memories, they're quite appealing, right? They serve as a bit of a kind of psychological resource for us. They help us cope with the stress. This is arguably this year's biggest nostalgia trip, right? Anyone got Oasis tickets? Oh, I see some of you has. Oh, I won't ask you how much you paid for them. This is as close as I got to Oasis this year, and we'll get to Oasis. This is Oasis, live from the Harlington Centre in Fleet, Hampshire. They were actually really good, but they're not quite Oasis. Why have I even mentioned this? Why have I even started talking about this? Well, there is this certain comfort in looking back, this kind of idea of nostalgia. And curiously, I think there's a parallel to the kind of more fast-paced world we live in software engineering. Now, has anyone read either of these books? Oh, excellent. So these are not new books, these books. So they were both written in the 1970s, but they contain a huge amount of incredibly useful advice. And so by turning up today, what you're going to do is you're going to join me in a little bit of a trip back in time, maybe. We'll see how applying some of the advice that Fred Brooks, Tom DeMarco, Timothy Lister mention in these books, and more specifically, you're going to see how following the advice in these could have helped prevent some mistakes in a large project that we ran in Bloom & Wild. So, hello, this is Ella. Look on the website if you want to see what Ella looks like. I'm Stephen. So I'm around for the rest of the conference. I'm definitely around this evening on the beach. So come and have a chat if you've got questions. We can't answer them. I can't answer them at the end of this. Or I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on LinkedIn. Connect with me. We can talk about things. I can tell you about more things that have gone wrong and more things that have gone right. So I work at a company called Bloom & Wild. So we're Europe's leading online flower and premium gifting delivery company. And back in 2021, right in the middle of the pandemic, we went on a bit of a shopping spree to fund our expansion, and we bought a couple of companies. So we bought a Dutch company called Bergamot, and we bought a French company, a Dutch company called Bloemon, a French company called Bergamot. And they've enabled us to really expand in Europe. And I won't talk about the fun you have when you integrate company cultures in the middle of a pandemic when no one can meet anyone, but suffice to say, the integration we did with Bloomon forms the basis of what I'm going to tell you about today. But I thought first I'd ask you a few questions. So has anyone in the audience been involved in a large technology integration project before? You put your hand up. Excellent. So a few people, keep your hand up, keep your hand up, keep your hand up. So put your hand down, or keep your hand up if it was a fun, enjoyable experience. One person still got their hand up. If it was a fun and enjoyable experience, would you do it again in exactly the same way? No hands. That's what I was hoping, because this would have failed if it had been different. So integration projects are hard, basically. They're hard. So what I'm here to do is tell you about an integration project. So an integration project where we were integrating a system from Bloom & Wild with a system from the company Bloomon that we had acquired. So in that particular system, it dealt with subscriptions. So subscription products for us are where you sign up for a certain number of ongoing deliveries. So you keep paying every month, you get beautiful flowers every month. And this was our mission when we started this project. So we wanted to create a customer-first subscription experience. Makes sense, right? That's what everyone wants. That's scalable. So we've got grand ambitions as a company, so we wanted it to be scalable. It needed to unlock revenue, and it needed to unlock growth, because that was why we spent the money to buy the companies and put them together. It needed to work for all Bloom & Wild group brands, and particularly it needed to work for Bloom & Wild as a brand, and it needed to work for Bloomon as a brand. So Bloomon is a brand we now have in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Denmark, a little bit in Germany as well. And it needed to do this while minimizing the risk of churn. So if any of you work in a company that works, whose product relies on subscriptions, churn rate is an absolutely critical metric. So you want people to keep paying you money every month. You don't want them to go away and give one of your competitors money, because it's very, very hard and expensive to get them back. So we wanted to minimize churn. And so we had a vision within the product and technology organization. So we wanted to build a system that was multi-brand. So instead of having a Bloom & Wild system and a Bloomon system, we had one system. It worked for both the brands. Not only did it work for both the brands, but we wanted it to work in all of the different markets. So Bloom & Wild as a brand has been traditionally very, very big in the UK, whereas Bloomon is a much bigger brand in the Netherlands, in Belgium in particular. So we needed this system to work for different markets as well as different brands. We wanted it to allow the customers to make their purchases and do their management on the web and on the apps. So there was a technology constraint that meant there were no mobile applications for the Bloomon brand. This project would unlock that capability. We wanted to make sure that there was room to grow. We'd build a system that was extendable. We wanted to make sure this system had a single account, so whether you were buying a subscription or whether you were buying a one-off delivery, you would have one account. You could manage all of your different orders and all of your different deliveries through. And as I'm sure you can imagine, and we're all very, very close in our line of work, we wanted a delivery plan that validated those critical decisions early and delivered that value incrementally. So all fairly standard stuff, I think. Now, some of these we met, some of them maybe not so much. We'll find out which as we go through. Now, there's a bit of background that's important to give you before we dive any further. So there were two technology stacks. So Bloomon and Bloom & Wild, both around about the same sort of age. They've both been on parallel journeys, and one had been a little bit more successful than the other. So we had two different technology stacks. So one of these we will call the Bloomon platform, and one of these we will call the Bloom & Wild platform. We decided to keep the Bloom & Wild platform and move everything, and move all the functionality and the customers onto that platform and make it work for both brands. One reason we decided to do that is because after acquiring Bloomon, we discovered that there was only one engineer in the company that knew how to operate their subscriptions platform. This was obviously quite a big risk. And we also did this against the background of a pretty stressed out product and technology team. So if you were here a couple of years ago, you would have heard Ella and Emma, one of our product managers, talk about what we called the gifting integration. So this is where we integrated the one-off deliveries parts of the two systems together. And we did that quickly and very rapidly. We pushed the team very hard because we wanted to prove value from the acquisition. and particularly to our board. And so we had a pretty stressed out product and engineering team. And so what we didn't want to do in this integration is put them through the same level of stress. So we took what I guess you could call a bit more of a relaxed approach to things. Now, the team itself, 65 in the technology team with another 20 or so in product, so around about 85 people involved in this integration, all organized in domain-focused, streamlined in the team topologies model type teams with platform data and IT as supporting or enabling teams. So each team here has its own product and technology domain. Some of those domains, if you were here for the previous talk, the architectural constraints point applies to some of these teams, so working in a few monoliths, but generally, teams organized like this, owning their own domains. Now, we wanted to see some benefits from this project, because you do it for benefits. So we wanted to get a better customer experience. So this was about enabling a better customer experience for our customers. So we wanted to build features and functionality that were more rich than customers had been used to. So simple stuff like, for example, a calendar view in order to enable you to manage your subscription better is something that we already had in the Bloom on Wild platform for Bloom on Wild subscriptions. We didn't have in the Bloom on platform. We had mobile apps for Bloom on Wild. We didn't have mobile apps for Bloom on. So we wanted to enable a richer customer experience. We obviously wanted to reduce that business risk of that one engineer who knew how to operate a platform on which now a fairly substantial part of our business relied. And we wanted to make progress on our technology strategy. So our technology strategy was to move to fewer apps and services. And in particular, we wanted to deprecate an old legacy PHP app, which was the application that was serving the whole Bloom on subscriptions part of the business. So these were the three main benefits that we had. Now, how do we start things? Well, so our architecture team drew up a vision, and we needed to make some pretty significant architectural changes, particularly within a Ruby monolith we have in our stack, in order to make the subscriptions piece pretty brand agnostic. And we wanted to avoid a big bang integration at the end. So we tried to design our way around that. We wanted to aim for clear domain boundaries, clear decoupling. So we started to do lots of discovery, lots and lots of discovery. We thought we needed to do all the discovery at the beginning for all the customer journeys. So we had lots of workshops led by our product managers and our engineering managers, aimed to define the technology approach, the sequencing, the resourcing, how we aligned the product vision, the tech strategy. And we tried to do that over a multi-month period before we actually started coding anything. Not sure that was particularly sensible or clever. And out of this came a phased, milestone-based delivery plan. What could possibly go wrong, right? You're all thinking this was absolutely the right thing to do, I'm sure. So out of this came these milestones. So our first milestone, which we called Milestone 1, very originally, this was about fulfilling these subscriptions and turning them into deliveries in the Bloom Wild platform. So this effectively meant taking the orders from one place and fulfilling the orders from another system. Then what we would do is we would build the new functionality needed for Bloom on, but we would actually roll it out to our Bloom on Wild subscribers because there were fewer of them, so it was effectively a way of doing a lower risk experiment. We would then, our third milestone, if you were a new Bloom on customer, you would use the new system, but existing customers would still use the old system. And then finally, we would migrate those old customers over from the old system onto the new system. So this was our attempt, basically, to split a much, much bigger problem down into smaller, more discrete, deliverable pieces. So our systems did act as a bit of a constraint. So it's important to explain these. So what did we build and how do we build it? So I guess in the red corner, We have what we call Bloom API. This is the Bloom on Subscriptions platform. And this is the old legacy PHP application, poorly understood, maintained by one person, pretty tech debt ridden. And that would talk to our production and our fulfillment systems. These were much more modern. And we acquired these with Bloom on as well. These are much more modern and well worth keeping. And then in the blue corner, we have the Bloom on Wild front-end app. We have the Bloom on Wild mobile apps. They talk to what we call the Bloom on Wild back-end platform. Now, this back-end platform, its data models reflected how Bloom on Wild sold subscriptions and how Bloom on Wild sold flowers, not necessarily how Bloom on did. So we've codified historical business processes in that platform. And then that platform talks to the production and fulfillment systems. So that's how you actually get your flowers, basically. And so the challenge of the project was to basically get rid of Bloom API. So deprecate Bloom API, have customers order and manage their subscriptions all through Bloom on Wild systems. So we started with milestone 1. So milestone 1, fulfilling these subscriptions deliveries in the Bloom on Wild platform. So it meant Bloom on subscribers still ordered via their own platform, but we took their order and we turned it into something we actually fulfilled through the Bloom on Wild platform. We needed to separate out quite a lot of core data models and core data model logic in order to do this, which sounds quite simple when you put it on a slide, but absolutely was not. And we were laying the groundwork for them building the future customer-facing platform on. So off we went on milestone 1. So everybody retreated back to their squads with their plans, which we thought were aligned. We started making all these changes to the Bloom on Wild back-end platform. And we did the right things. We checked in regularly on progress. Everybody said it's fine. Everything seemed fine. Anyone seeing where there might have been problems already? Because it's only fine until it's not fine, right? So it all started to go a little bit wrong at this point. This, I guess, is why you've turned up, right? You want the bad story? So we rapidly started to get drowned in debt, in architectural debt. Now, this didn't initially show itself as an architectural constraint or architectural debt. What it showed itself as is a very high coordination overhead. So for any squad to get anything done, they needed to talk to at least 1 or 2 or 3 other squads. The reason they needed to do that is because we were working in monoliths, and there was a lot of debt in those monoliths and close coupling of data models. So it meant we had sought to give more autonomy than the squads themselves were able to take. And this meant that trying to do something not as naively simple as taking an order from one system and fulfilling it in another system turned out to be extremely hard. We also discovered that the different systems, particularly the production systems and the e-commerce systems, there was a bit of a battle in the way those had been designed between one highly opinionated system. So in a production environment, you either have the stems to make a bouquet or you don't have the stems to make a bouquet. There's no gray area there. Whereas in an e-commerce environment, you can keep taking orders until you say, I'm going to stop taking orders. And so this started to mirror itself up in customer feature issues, as customers tried to manage their subscriptions in certain ways that the systems were not actually able to handle. But we only got to know that, and the customer only got to know that very, very late in their journey of actually getting their subscription delivered. And then finally, we were trying to do too much at the same time without identifying thinner slices of value. So although we had 4 milestones, that first milestone was huge. It looked like it was small, but it turned out to, particularly because of the architectural constraints, to be massive. And so we sat in lots of meetings, and this kept being said in all the meetings, we're so close to the end of milestone 1. We weren't. It might be because I think this is one of my favorite quotes in software engineering now. So I think we were suffering from the remaining 10% of the code taking the other 90% of the time, and the state of our underlying code bases were acting as that underlying constraint. But I'm the VP engineering at Bloom and Wild, so this was the bigger problem for me. I would have stakeholders saying, when's it going to be done, Steve? When's it going to be done, Steve? When's it going to be done, Steve? So we started to make some changes. And this is where we started to make some mistakes. So I'll talk you through a few mistakes we made and then explain why they were mistakes and then what we did about it. So mistake number one, we were slipping behind schedule. We had most of the team on the project, but not all the team. So we thought, let's just add everybody on the project, because the more people you add on the project, right, the better things become, because you've got more people doing more work. Let's come to our first lesson from history. So I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of Brooks' Law. It's the one thing that people remember from this book, or have heard of even if they haven't actually read the Mythical Man Month. But what Brooks said, and he's absolutely right, is adding people to a late software project just makes it later. And that sounds counterintuitive, but trying to speed up a project by adding more people is the wrong thing to do. Now, why is this? Well, firstly, you have an onboarding overhead. So when you start to add more people to your project, they need to learn. They take time away from the people already on the project to train those people, to get them up to speed, to get them a high-performing part of the team. So that makes your team slower rather than making it faster. It increases the coordination overhead as you add more people into a team. That makes it harder to get things done. And some tasks in software are not divisible by a certain number of people. There comes a constraint when you cannot divide the tasks to be done by more people. And if you do, you actually end up introducing inefficiency rather than making things more efficient as you were originally hoping to do so. There's another point here as well, which is as we put everybody in the engineering team on the project, it meant we were not delivering anything else that was not subscriptions integration. And by the time we were about 12 months into the project, most people in the company didn't really care about subscriptions integration. They wanted their other thing done that would give them more immediate value and bring more immediate value to the company. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two was we weren't aware of our tar pit. Now, you might be thinking, what's a tar pit? You may also be thinking, I don't know, like me, this is one of the best AI-generated pictures I think I've ever seen. So Brooks talks about tar pits in the Mythical Man Month, and he uses this as an analogy. So he uses the analogy of a tar pit in prehistoric times where, I don't know, your Tyrannosaurus Rex would be chasing a Stegosaurus and fall in a tar pit, and then the tar pit would suck the Tyrannosaurus Rex down. And he used that as an analogy for software projects becoming bogged down. There's not one single factor that causes this. There are multiple factors in a project that you need to be aware of. So what was our tar pit? So our tar pit, firstly, was this increased complexity that we uncovered as we went through the organization. So it turned out Bloom on subscriptions worked very, very differently from Bloom on Wild ones. And despite all of our upfront analysis and workshops, we hadn't really understood the architectural constraints. When we came around to our last milestone of migrating the existing Bloom on customers to the new system, we found out that the integrity of the data on those customers was very poor. We had to go through multiple iterations of migrations and data cleanup before we could actually get those customers in a state where they could actually use the new system. And we also had a lot of what was called second systems effect. So you may have heard of second systems effect, you may not. Second systems effect is another point made by Brooks in the Mythical Man Month. So this is the tendency for engineers to over-design the second system that they build. And It happens because they want to apply experience that they've gained from the first system. They may have not had the opportunity to build that perfect system first. So in our case, we had just done what we called gifting integration, i.e. we had integrated together the one-off platforms, and we'd done that under extreme pressure, and so we'd had to cut some corners. And so this was an opportunity in the engineers' minds to stop cutting some corners. But the consequences of doing so is you get feature bloat, you get timelines that bloat out, you get increased complexity as people try and build what they think is the perfect system. And then our third mistake, underestimating that whole coordination and that whole communication overhead. So remember, we had 6 squads, 85 people at this stage working on the project. So a huge coordination overhead. And Brooks talks about this in the Mythical Man Month. Lister and DeMarco talk about it in Peopleware as well. And they talk about this idea of communication as a primary cost. So in software development, they say communication between team members, especially in larger projects, consumes a significant proportion of project time and effort. And as the size of a team grows, the number of communication paths in that team grows, and it gets harder and harder to get things done and has an impact on productivity. And you need more formal coordination mechanisms within teams as teams get larger. So as an example, if you've got 3 people in a team, you have 3 communication paths. But if you add only 2 more people, you have 10 communication paths. If you have 7 people, you have 21. 9, you have 36. Once you get up to 17 people, there are 136 communication paths in your team. So if you've got 85 people working on something, that's a ridiculous amount of communication paths. Now, if you like a formula like me, I've got a physics background, this is actually the formula if you want to calculate the number of communication paths. So in this example, a team of 4 people has 6 communication paths. It's this that causes teams to grind to a halt. So it was time to stop. It was time to pivot. It was time to do something different. Time to make some changes. So to get things back on track, firstly, we stopped, we cut scope. We went back to our stakeholders. We said, what do you actually need? No, what do you actually need now, and what would you have later? We cut the team size. So we took people actively off the project to reduce the communication and coordination overhead. And we made fewer people responsible for that higher level design. So we did this by building a compatibility layer to solve some of our architectural constraints. And this was a temporary compatibility layer. It's no longer in our technology stack, but it served us for that purpose. We made sure with this smaller team, we built much more of a sense of smaller wins and much more momentum. And we focused and we iterated, and we tried to move from these big monolithic milestones to smaller deliverables in smaller chunks. And we gave this a name because if you make up a way of working, you should always give it a name, right? We called this the 7 C's concept. So the 7 C's concept goes something like this. So you have one person, you get them to split the larger problem into smaller pieces. So for example, in milestone 2, rather than 1 milestone, we had 7 different C's. You make sure each piece has a clear set of outcomes, benefits, and is assigned to a particular team. You then, and this is the most important part, you pick an ocean or a sea that actually represents the size of what you're trying to do, just so that people can get a bit of a relative idea of how big something is. It's also more fun than calling it small, medium, large, extra large. And then you deeply plan that first C, and you only lightly plan the next ones. And then you just get started. You build prototypes if you need to, but the core thing is you actually get started. And you only deeply plan that next C when you've made enough progress on the first one. And that's absolutely key. So an example, this is actually the first phase of the second milestone, called North Pacific, because the North Pacific is quite a big sea. And this was all about creating deliveries, putting them in a pipeline, and that leading to creation in the other system. So what you can see here is you've got some clear outcomes, you've got some clear benefits, you've got some clear owners and people that are interested, and a smaller number of people involved. So the idea here is that there's less coordination overhead. And as this was being delivered, our principal engineer was planning out the next C, which unsurprisingly was South Pacific. And we worked our way around some of the seas of the world as we went through that part of the project. But the intention here is to cut things down, make them smaller. And what we were doing here is we were actually, without realizing it, following some of the advice in these books. So the idea in the Mythical Man Month about conceptual integrity and architectural design and having a unified vision, this was all driven from a unified vision from our principal engineer. Brooks talks about the idea of pilot plants and iterations, the idea of building small prototypes in order to assess the viability of different approaches that won't last in your stack forever. And both books talk about the idea of communication overhead, team coordination. By only getting the squads and the teams that really needed to be involved in these pieces of work involved, then we cut all of that coordination overhead down. So without realizing it, we were following some advice in here, and it was right. So I've talked a lot about things that went wrong, and I've talked about the ways we sought to fix the issues. I don't know, if I was you, I was sat in the audience, I'd be thinking, stop telling us about all of that. What actually happened? So what actually happened? So we started the subscriptions integration project on the 17th of January 2022. We finished the subscriptions integration project on the 13th of December 2023, 12 months later than we had planned to do it. It took twice as long as we thought it should have done. Now, if any of you have ever watched Grand Designs, if this was Grand Designs, the family would be sat round the table with like Kevin MacLeod on the other side, and he'd be going, "What about the budget then?" And they'd be sitting there with their like 3 children they'd had while building their house and living in a caravan and stuff like that. And they'd go slightly over budget, and Kevin would raise his eyebrow, thinking of the bit he did to camera at the very beginning of the episode that they hadn't seen, where he said, of course they're going to be massively over budget. We were massively over budget. This is actually a good example of some things we did to build momentum in the project. So these are subs integration stickers. So when we reached a particular milestone, you got a sticker, and then when you built them together, they're actually stuck on the back of here as well. You built yourself up a little picture. So just really easy, quick, cheap way of building a bit of momentum towards a particular goal. So despite all you've heard, there were some wins in this project. So we did end up building a beautiful new subscription system. It served both brands. It served all of our markets. So we did eventually reach our vision. This system was more flexible in places. We did reduce our dependencies on people and tools because we did deprecate the old system. We built a system that had richer functionality, which made it easier for our customers to manage their subscriptions. And as we went through the project, we were able to use new architectural patterns and coding practices as well. So it was a good learning opportunity for our team. Teams were forced to collaborate more because this was a bigger project, but that's actually a good thing because it started to prevent silos and enable people to talk to each other a little bit more, which particularly when you're trying to run a project like this fully remotely is really, really important. We identified new ways of working that we now use in future projects. And we enabled lots of learning, lots of cross-squad learning, and particularly how not to run large integration projects like this. And we learned a lot along the way. The first thing we did learn is we learned that parts of our tech stack was in a worse state than we thought it was. Now, this has now led to a new technology strategy. So while it was regrettable at the time, it's put us on a slightly different path to actually, and it's better to know about your problems than not know about them. We learned that having the whole team focused on one thing isn't the best thing for the business. We learned about how we could make our team more flexible. So, for example, we learned how to start using techniques such as inner source, where you enable a particular set of engineer to work in a part of the code base that they may not be particularly familiar with. So a kind of internal version of an open source model, if you're familiar with that. We changed our hiring practices, so we hired more generalist engineers that will be able to be impactful across more of our stack. We learned that it's far better to deliver projects with micro milestones, and in particular with off-ramps. So clear guidance we now give to our teams is, if you have a milestone, you have to be able to stop the project at that milestone instead of realized value. We learned that data migrations are hard. I don't have a solution for that. They are just hard. So maybe we should move on. We learned that domain boundaries are important. Being clear on who's responsible for what and being able to draw the boundary and design around the boundary is incredibly important. We learned that celebrating the right things is the right thing to do, and doing that often is important to build momentum, particularly when you're in a long and drawn-out project. And we learned that small and focused teams that work on small and focused projects are more successful. So by taking that step back to actually cut the team scope after the first milestone, we learned a really important lesson that we try and apply now. So to kind of sum up, we should listen to people like this. It's not about a nostalgia thing. It's about good advice. And old advice is often good advice. So if you're running projects like that, be aware of your tar pit. Identify your tar pit and take it into account in how you plan your project. Pay attention to Brooks' law. Time and people are not interchangeable. Watch out for the second systems effect, particularly if you are working in a project which has rapidly followed another similar one. And never underestimate that coordination overhead within your projects, particularly the more teams you have involved. And celebrate with socks. Everyone got socks. These socks are lovely. And read books. Everybody should read more books. So thank you to all of these wonderful people that were involved in the project. We would not have got anywhere near the end without their knowledge, their expertise, and their patience. And thank you to all of you for turning up and listening.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. That was brilliant. Right, let's dive into some questions.
Yeah, anyone got any questions?
Hi, Stephen. Thanks so much for that. It was a fascinating insight. Was there ever a point you thought, we can't do this?
Yes. Yeah, about 12 months in, we got to the stage where we thought, should we just stop? And because if you've ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy, then there's a real danger in projects where you get so far in, you think, we've invested so much in this, we just have to finish it. But at that sort of stage, we were at the point where a lot of our stakeholders were saying, look, I don't care about subscriptions. I want you to do this. This is more valuable. So yes, I think that was one of the things that really drove that pivot to plan the rest of the project out fundamentally differently. Just there, I think you've got the mic. You've got the mic.
Yeah, I got the mic. That was really interesting and really insightful, so thank you for that. You obviously had a lot of learnings, and that's great. Standing where you are now, is there anything that you would say, well, we would have done this differently, even from all the good things you've learned and you've changed? Was there any more that you've learned since that you'd go, I'd do that differently?
I think if we could do it again, one thing we would do differently, and this maybe fits it a little bit in if anyone was in the preceding talk, is we had an existing long-lived stable team structure, and we took the work to the teams. And we still do that to most extent. And I think if we needed to do a project like that again, I would do it differently. I would take a serious look at the organizational structure, knowing the scale of the delivery to be made, and consider adjusting that organizational structure to make it as efficient as possible, rather than saying stable, long-lived teams is the real solution here. Over there.
You've made my husband's day, because that's The Mythical Man Month is his favourite book in the whole world, and he gives it to everybody. So when did you read it, and when did you start paying attention to it to make this project finally successful?
So it's interesting, because a lot of when did I read it? So
Who told you to read it?
So I didn't read it until after the project had completed, But what I found by doing that is that some of the things we had done with no knowledge of the Mythical Man Month actually were validated by what Brooks had written in the Mythical Man Month, or what DeMarco and Lister had written in Peopleware. So there were some things like Brooks' Law, for example, I was very aware of, but we just went ahead anyway. But I think I only really discovered the value of that book subsequently.
Any more questions? Are there any books like that that you've read since that you would recommend as well?
Oh, that's
as impactful.
While this man here asks his question, I'll have a think on yours.
Interesting what you're saying about the coordination effort, and when you addressed it was reducing the number of people in the team. Coming at it from a different angle, how were you able to visualize and monitor the coordination effort throughout the project?
To a certain extent, although not particularly quantifiably. So I think often you get a feeling the coordination overhead is too hard. So either you start to get feedback from the organisation that says, "Oh my God, we're always in meetings," or you find yourself always in meetings and you question why there are 25 people in the meeting. Or you turn up to a meeting and, I don't know, I'm the budget holder. I turn up to the meeting and I look at the cost of that meeting. And then afterwards, you only have to have a few of those. And you think, well, actually, that wasn't value for money at all. So quantifiably, now we try and look at the number of epics, for example, that cross across different squads to try and get a view. But I don't think we're particularly quantifiable about it. But the core problem of trying to cut that coordination down, it's a byproduct of actually cutting the slice of value down and reducing the number of squads, which I firmly believe is the right thing to do, irrespective of whether you can actually measure it or not. I think you get to value in production ultimately quicker. And if you can slice something to get value at the end of every slice, and you effectively mandate that as a way of working, then you're building momentum, you're showing progress, and you're delivering value for the organisation, even if it's not the total value. Some value now is better than lots of value later, in my head. While you go over there, books that I subsequently read that I think are really valuable. Team Topologies is a massively valuable book, and I would very much recommend reading it. It contains a huge amount of very useful information on how you can set organisations up so that there's a fast flow of value. Question over there.
You spoke about 3 companies that were being brought together. That project obviously was 2 companies. How did it go the second time round with the third company? With the third company,
we haven't actually integrated the third company yet.
Okay.
So the third company is currently separated, maybe in the future. I think we've sort of lost our willingness to do integrations for a bit. Yeah, when I need another conference talk, we'll do the integration. I'll be back in a year, tell you about it.
Okay, we've got time for one more.
Thanks for the talk, Stephen. That was really enjoyable. I have a super quick one. That guy that was originally at Bluemon, who was the single owner of all the knowledge, is he still with the business?
Absolutely. He's an incredibly talented engineer. So he works in the subscription side of our combined platform now.
And was he helpful in the project?
Very, very much so.
Nice.
Yeah, he was. I think when you're in that sort of scenario, I think you can either make a decision to be very closely aligned with the past, or you can actually just be really open and growth oriented and think, okay, here comes the opportunity for me. He very much did that latter piece. So no, he's an excellent engineer.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, let's give Stephen a final round of applause, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.